Went to Binto on
Roger. Yeah. All right. I'm going to do a little bit of talking in a minute, but what I think we might do before I talk about different testing methods and so on is maybe have a look at what Kevin's got over here. Do you mind if we all come over here? It's right we all come over here and just have a look at what Kevin has set up for us.
Down.
Just ask him a couple of questions.
That's it. Lights on. There we go. Cameras.
Alright, so Kevin's using a method for testing his telescope mirror called Foucault Unmasked. It's a different way of doing the Foucault test. In my understanding of it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, basically you're using a camera instead of your eye to take the images of the Foucault of the mirror. Got a knife edge test here, not a wonky screen, so looking at shadowgrams of the mirror. And I was going to explain a bit about why we use masks and so on to test mirrors. But when we take when we're doing a test of a telescope mirror, we normally test particular zones, and we try to measure the change in the depth of. We're trying to measure the slope of the parabola. So we're trying to take different radii measurements from the inside to the outside of the mirror's focus. Now, we can do that a couple of different ways, but this is a new method, and instead of using a mask, you take the image, and my understanding is that the software that you pump your image into then basically finds the different zonal areas for you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And then you can do it. And this is the setup.
It is a setup, yeah.
Yes.
Actually works. The problem is it's very sensitive, of course, to people standing on the floor, air currents. What else am I missing? Temperature.
All the things the normal test
All
is.
the normal things. So
from the ceiling.
at the moment, yes, it's moved. I don't know if I've got a problem with the little LED light. Don't tell me in that car. Is it just still going there? No, it seems to be going out.
There it is, the back.
Bad connection somewhere there. Yeah, so if you stand behind your well, see that it's sort of at roughly the first zone here. So they're the sort of pictures you would try to get, which are very similar to the ones down the front there. And you can get a series of pictures like that where they're symmetrical, then you'll get good results from the software. If you get pictures where it's not symmetrical, for instance, that's not symmetrical, and that's not symmetrical, but if I hold the table the right way, it will become. It's very, very sensitive. So that's sort of a symmetrical sort of shot. But just a little bit of finger weight on the table will be enough to move it. So you could probably get a couple of gram weights and just set it up. But for me to move over there, the whole thing will change. Which would be normal. I imagine you all understand this because you've probably had this problem. Normally optic benches are granite with steel rails.
That's right.
Yeah.
And usually you've got concrete floors, I suppose. So.
Yeah, I found at home, I migrated out of the house, it was hopeless. Into the garage where it's got a concrete floor and a steel bench.
Yep.
It's been terrific.
Okay. Then you've got the current still to get.
But I do have a garage that faces into the afternoon sun, so basically if the sun comes out, shut it down, walk away. But grab the plastic ware out of that area because it melted the other day.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so it's just a matter now of advancing. You've got a gauge here which just measures the distances offset 0.5 millimetres as a distance. Just wind it back bit by bit, take a photo, make sure it's centred, and even on a concrete floor you still get a little bit of movement, probably because I'm not exactly aligned, and it'd be as simple as that. You're looking at very, very fine tolerances. So even on the concrete floor I tend to just put a finger on the table a tiny bit and take a photo.
Yeah.
Rather than mucking, I tried putting ounce weights on and gave up that and that's too hard. So pretty much, and if you wind this back a tiny bit, come back another half millimetre and probably progress to the next shot. if I can find a magic spot.
So you've got an SLR camera with what's the big zoom lens, have you?
Look, what works well on a full frame camera like this is around about 150 to 200 mil in that range. If you're a half frame camera, you'd probably be looking at about a 50 to 100 mil of zoom. The zoom works well. You want a reasonably good wide aperture for about f4 or something like that. It doesn't have to be f2.8 or 1.4 or something like that, but about f4 is fine. And then the main thing with camera is it can be absolutely no automatics on it. It's manual focus, manual exposure, manual ISO, manual everything. Because if you have any, even manual focus, if you have any part that's not manual, then when you put the software, when you put the pictures into the software, you might have variations in ISO, exposure levels, anything. And the software will analyse it and sort of give you interesting results, but not correct results. And that makes sense. Everything's got to be the same.
Yeah.
Do you rely on the quality of your lens and the camera?
Look, it's not that critical. I can just shoot JPEGs. You're best to use the full area. The software only accepts a JPEG or PNG, so it won't accept RAW. So you don't need that sort of quality, but you certainly wouldn't want to have it overexposed, and you wouldn't want to have it underexposed. And that took a while to find what works well.
Yep.
And the best way to get that is to get it pretty much on the middle null, which is one of these ones around there, and try and get the light and dark nicely shaped like those ones are, so you've got even donuts. You know. If you set the exposure outside of that, it's going to be too bright probably.
Right, yes.
If it's too bright and it's overexposed, then the software will give you interesting results.
You've got a question, Ken? No, I was going to say swap the cup to that side and I correct it.
Oh, the cup.
The cup.
Oh, hang on. Fixed. That's all I have to do.
That's great. But you can see, I mean, for those of you over there, you might want to come around, you can see a fairly clear shadowgram over here.
Put some heat in front of it too.
Oh, it's gone now.
Oh,
You were standing in the
You'll need
right
to stand
spot.
over there. It's somewhere there. There you go. Now, which one? It's a matter of putting a bit of weight on.
That's what the cup was for.
Yeah, right. So I can do a little adjustment here as long as no one moves. That way, there.
There we go.
There we go, somewhere around about there. And then you can sort of almost weigh more than you can.
I won't down.
All right.
Oh, got to go on a diet, sir.
All right. You happy for people to come up and have a look later?
Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Kevin, how many zone readings can you do?
Any zones, I've set it at the moment to 0.5 mil, which gives 6 zones. So if I set it to 0.25 mil, which is taken under in more shots, let's get probably 10 or 11 skull zones.
We're all set up again, and I don't want to spend too much time talking up here. I really just want to introduce you to a couple of ideas, and then maybe have a bit of practice with some of the testing equipment that's set up. So I just wanted to, I suppose, go over a couple of basic concepts. And one is just to mention what we're trying to achieve when we're making a telescope mirror. And the first thing you'll read in books like Tesoro and some of the others that are around is just what this statement by Don John and Kudo, which is probably about 100 years old, and in terms of what we're trying to do. And number one is you want your mirror to be as smooth as possible, and the second is that your peak to valley error on the mirror should be as small as possible. And usually we talk about that being a quarter of a wave on the wavefront. The first one doesn't get mentioned a lot about the smoothness, and a lot of people focus on the number rather than the smoothness. And whenever I'm testing a mirror, I look at things like just whether I can see what's sometimes called lemon peel or bumps when you see this kind of rippling effect in a Ronchi test, or it literally does look like lemon peel under a Foucault test. So you look for that kind of thing, because you want your mirror to be as smooth as possible if it's to perform. Okay, so a few simple tests that amateurs use, and we use them all the time in our meetings here. The most common one we use, because it's the simplest to use, is a Ronchi test. I've got a couple of gratings in here, a couple on slides and one on a piece of glass. Ken very often generously brings his tester along and lets us use that. I have this ambition, I don't know whether it's a good ambition or not, that I'd like to be able to build a 3D printed Fuko Ronchi tester that we can just sort of provide to people when they're interested. And I've got a couple of very, very rough prototypes here which you're welcome to have a look at. If I can pass those around. I guess the thing that we don't look at as often with Fuko testers in this meeting, we tend, when we're helping people here, just to try and give them an idea of whether they've got a sphere. We're often talking about whether the edges turn or things like that, which are very easy errors to pick up with a Ronchi screen. But once you get to the point where you've got a sphere and you want to get to a parabola, you can't just sort of test that easily just by looking at the mirror face off. You actually need to modify the tester a bit. And you'll notice on this tester, and it's in Ken's as well, there's a gauge there. So there's a which enables you to measure how far back the knife edge is moving when you're looking at a particular point in the mirror. So, classic way of testing mirror to check whether or not it's a parabola is to set up a zonal mask a little bit like this. Pop that in front of your mirror. All right, measure the radius that you get, both those zones darkening at the same time. Then move your tester out slowly with the adjustment knob, and then see these two zones when they darken at the same time. Take that measurement and you keep going until you get to the very edge. Now, the problem with this tester is it's relatively subjective, you know. So what we try to do to get rid of the subjectivity is to take multiple readings on each zone. So, for example, I would usually do 3 to 4 readings. So it's time consuming because there's 8 zones, I think, on this one. So 8 times 4, 32, so 32 readings. Yeah, so it can take a while, but it's a good test. It's just, you need a bit of patience to make it work and to work well for you. Once you've got all those measurements, you can pump them into a computer program which will analyse the results for you. And I'll show you that in a moment. So that's one way of doing it. The other way, Barry doesn't actually like this test very much, which is fine. I do it this way. He uses a pin stick, and Barry's going to set that up on one of the mirrors later so you can have a go and see what that looks like. And he actually looks at where the bands go in terms of where they show on a couple of nails on a pin stick. All right, that achieves the same thing in terms of measuring the zones. It's just a different way of doing it, which a lot of people find a bit easier. Now, you can actually use the Ronchi test to test for whether or not you've got a parabola. And one of the tests that was very popular, I think, in this group a while back was called the Lumley test. And you draw this little bands on with a texture on the mirror, and then you'd find an offset where those bands would match with the. You would basically move your Ronchi screen back a specified amount and see whether or not your bands that you've drawn on your mirror were centred inside the Ronchi bands. Now, Mel Bartels has kind of developed that test a bit further and come up with what he calls a matching Ronchi test. And here's an example of it here. So what he does is he takes a photograph of his Ronchi screen, all right, and you can then set up with the program just how far back, what the offset is you've moved your Ronchi screen at, like how far back. It's usually something like 0.5 of a mil or whatever. And you can see there, he's actually, those dark bits are actually the photograph superimposed on the Ronchi screen. Okay. So what he does is he looks to see how well centred they are inside the bands. So to me that looks like it's just moving a little bit to the right. But yeah, claims that's pretty good. I've got no reason to doubt it. It makes very large, very fast mirrors and uses that as his technique for paraboliting, so I guess it works. Personally, I find it difficult to make. What I find difficult with the Lumley test and the test like that is you're actually looking for very, very subtle movements in the band, in that dark area, in terms of how far across it moves inside the zone, inside the rocky line. So I personally find it a bit difficult to use, but it's a simple test to use. And I would imagine that for people who are happy with F7, F8 mirrors, it probably works very well. As you get faster, you probably need to get a lot more skill. So, I was just going to mention a bit about the testers at this point, which is just to say, what I mentioned earlier, that those testers have that opportunity to move in a longitudinal direction and move in a very specific, very accurate distance. So you need to be able to move your knife edge with the Ronchi screen in a very measurable, accurate distance, and it's usually about 100th of a millimetres in terms of the accuracy you want. Right, now I just wanted to show you this is what Mel Buntell's site looks like. So I was just going to quickly show you how he does it. So I'm just going to find. So you're able to take a photo of it like that one. You basically just paste it into here. I hope this is going to work. Yeah. So it's just sort of gone in over there. You then set your parameters over here. So we put in mirror, it's got a focal length, focal ratio of 4.5.
The diameter didn't change.
Well, that diameter is still 12 now.
Oh, is it? Thank you. Thank you. Didn't have the number locked. I don't think I'll fiddle around with that too much, but basically what you do is you adjust these parameters over here so that you're getting the right offset, you're entering your mirror details, and you can basically have you can paste your picture of your mirror test onto a particular grating, and you can have a look at how the bands fit inside it. he's got some examples further down the page, which he encourages you to play with, you know. And I really just wanted to show you that website as something you can use as an option.
What's the website? Right, sorry.
It's just Mel Bartels.
Bartels.
Yeah, VB Astro Designs. So if you just go to Mel Bartels' website and just look up calculators, and then one of them underneath there says Rocky. Just click on that, it'll open
And you
up.
get adjusted to like F4.47995 or something.
Yes, exactly. So he's got them there with, I think his latest one is 16 inches f2.9 or something. So very, very
Food
fast.
bowl.
Yeah. So,
Half an inch thick glass.
Years ago, right, I think when Ken was doing the instrument making, I think people used to try and print the Ronki's lines on the transparencies.
yeah.
I thought they printed them on the transparencies and tried to line them up.
Yeah. One suggestion he made for people that had difficulties with photographs was just to, he said to just print out the thing and then enlarge it to the size of your mirror and then have it at the back of your mirror. So if your mirror is transparent like this plate glass, you just look straight through it and you can see it that way. So that would be another way you can try it. I won't go over that, it's just a bit about why he thinks it's a good idea. Alright, now I wanted to say, you're probably wondering how you take good pictures like that, and you might remember Beth coming along with this arrangement last year sometime, I think. So she's actually, this is her tester for taking pictures of her mirror and getting some very good Ronki screen images with that. So you've got a camera and you just want to spend a little bit of time with some pieces of wood and some razor blades, and you can knock together a fairly simple jig to take photographs. The instructions are on Don Peckham's website. I think that's his name.
Yeah.
Don Peckham's website, and it explains how to do it. And there's some of Beth's images that she took of her mirror when she was building it, and they're pretty good quality. So you could certainly use images like that for the test we were talking about before. Don't need any special equipment. Alright, I mentioned a little bit about pin sticks and zonal tests before, so that's what the pin stick looks like. And we've already had a look at the Buchheim mask. So if you're interested in that test that we were talking about that Kevin has, you can look it up on GitHub. And the software is available there, Buchheim Unmasked. And there's some instructions there on how to use it. Were they the instructions you used? Yep. Yeah.
You obviously understood. They're understandable. Some instructions are not understandable.
There's a lot of time spent trying to get it to work. The software is quite good. Once you get good data, it works well.
Alright. Yeah, once you've got,
Dad, I think we've lost the HDMI.
oh, have we? Oh, great. That's all right. We'll probably come to the end of that anyway.
Cable hasn't come out the back of your laptop, has it?
Sorry?
Cable hasn't come out the back of your laptop.
It's a weak signal area. It really is.
No, that's all right. Look, I think I'll not say too much more anyway. I really just wanted to say, actually, Paul could probably do this for me anyways. When you've got your data, say, on your zonal measurements, like across here, there's quite a few computer programs available online that will analyse the results for you. In the old days, people used to have to spend quite a bit of time doing handwritten calculations to work out how accurate their mirror was. These days, most people use a program called Figure XP, and you just enter in the focal length of your mirror, the diameter of your mirror, details about the zones, the inner radius, the outer radius, then enter your measurements, and it comes up with a calculation, like a Strel ratio or a wavefront error ratio, and it also shows you a bit of a map of the surface of your mirror and where the errors are. So if you're interested in having a look at that, you can look at it on this computer up here, or on Paul's outside. Now, I guess the other things I wanted to mention was that if you are interested in making mirrors and you want to test them, it's fairly tempting to have a quick look at it with a Ronchi screen and say, yeah, it's done. What I'm trying to explain to you today is you need to take a little bit more care than that. See whether or not you've got a parabola, because a parabola, an ellipse and a hyperbola all look almost identical under a Foucault test or a Ronchi test. So you don't know whether you're undercorrected or you're overcorrected. And it's also possible to have something like a mirror with a deep centre and a rolled edge. And if you don't know what you're looking at, that can also look a bit like a parabola. All right, so you need something like this to tell you exactly what it is you've got. You either need a matching Ronchi test, a Coude mask, or a pin stick, or you need a null test. And best null test I know of is an autocollimation test. We're going to use that later on Stuart's mirror. But there are other null tests available too. The simplest one is to pop a Ronchi screen or a knife edge on your eyepiece and look at a star. All right, that will give you a null test. So that's a simple one to use that anybody can use. But when you're testing a mirror, always use at least two testing techniques. Because of the subjectivity involved in testing this way, you want some other means of confirming your result.
Right.
Yeah, so second tests would be a star test, or autocollimation test, or a bath interferometer. And Ken's actually got a bath interferometer, and I'm sure he's happy to explain to anybody here how that works. And that's a very authoritative test, particularly on astigmatism. So, yeah, that's all I wanted to say about it. What I was hoping we could do now is we've got a couple of mirrors available for testing. Paul's got his 12-inch mirror out there, and I know most of us usually go out and we just have a cursory look at the mirror underneath the test and say, oh yeah, that's interesting, it looks like a sphere, or it looks like that. We actually don't know what figure Paul's got on it. It looks roughly like a parabola. It could be a hyperbola, it could be an ellipse, it could be anything really. I'd like you all to practice taking some zonal measurements. I'm sure Paul can explain to you how to do that, or if Paul has trouble, I can do that, and see whether you can find where the shadows match on the screen. And after you've played with that for a little while, we might swap over and put another mirror out there and set it up with the pin stick and try and test that way. Okay, so that's the formal part I wanted to sort of say. I'm sorry, it's been a bit jumbled. And also, just to say thanks to Vince and Philomena for getting all this organised for us today and doing all that running around in the background with the remote. So thank you very much.
Your thanks will be if you eat it all.
Sorry?
The thanks will be noted if you eat it all.